No, not him. Stanley Milgram. Stanley Milgram was born in New York City in 1933. His parents were both Jewish. He attended Queens College, where he obtained a BA in political science. He then applied and was first rejected to Harvard's PhD program for social psychology. Then, in 1960, after acquiring his degree, he began working at Yale University as an assistant professor. During that time, World War II had ended and the Germans were on trial for the massacre of the Jewish people. Adolf Eichmann was one of the Germans who was on trial and claimed that he was just following orders and simply did as he was told. The Holocaust and the Germans' obedience to authority was the main inspiration from Milgram and why he created this experiment. Because Milgram and his family were Jewish, he was especially interested in the reason why so many Germans willingly killed over 6 million Jewish people. Milgram was Solomon Asch's teaching and research assistant. Asch conducted conformity experiments. Milgram was influenced by his work and wanted to go beyond Asch's conformity research. Milgram wanted to demonstrate the power of social influence with something at a more consequential level than Asch's studies.
In 1961, Milgram began his experiment on obedience to authority at Yale University. He recruited 40 male subjects between ages 20 to 50 years old. He advertised it as an experiment on memory and learning through mail and newspaper advertisements.
What's going to happen, what you're supposed to do. The teacher will read a list of word pairs to you like these.
In Milgram's study, subjects were paid to participate in what they were told was an experiment on the effects of punishment on learning. Subjects were told that they would be the teacher. They were instructed to ask questions of a respondent in an adjoining room. The respondent, or learner, was actually an accomplice in the study. The experimenter stood by to act as an authority figure.
Begin. Blue girl. Nice day.
The subject presented the learner with a set of word pairs that the learner was expected to remember. The learner was then given a stimulus word along with 4 other words.
Green. Grass, hat, ink, apple. Answer, please.
His task was to recall which of those 4 words was originally paired with the stimulus word. The respondent indicated his choice by pushing a button corresponding to one of the 4 words. If the wrong answer was given, the experimenter ordered the subject to administer an electric shock to the learner.
Milgram created an electric shock generator with 30 switches. The switches increased in 15-volt increments ranging from 15 volts all the way to 450. There were labels ranging from moderate shock to danger, severe shock, even to X. The subjects were unaware that the shock generator was in reality a fake model only producing sound, not actually any shock. Each time a shock was administered, a pre-recorded audio clip of the learner screaming was played. This served as a control for the experiment so that every teacher, or subject, heard the same responses.
My heart bothers me. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let
Go
me
on.
out. Let me out.
Responsible for it. Red. That is incorrect. This will be at 3:30. The correct phrase is rich
Let me out of
boy.
here. Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out, I tell you. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. You have no right to hold me
The
here.
next phrase is fast.
The surprising and disturbing results of the Milgram experiment reveal how obedience can take precedence over moral sense. Many subjects initially showed reluctance to administer shock, especially when the learner complained about a heart condition and the increasing level of pain. But in the end, 2/3 of the subjects obeyed authority and administered the highest level of shock, 450 volts.
The answer is duck. 435 volts. It says danger, severe shock here. Next X on the next one.
Continue, please.
435 volts. Next one, brave. Woman, soldier, dog, horse.
These subjects were ordinary, well-intentioned people. Conformity and obedience are obviously powerful forces. But do conformity and obedience always have undesirable consequences?
We didn't need Milgram to tell us we have a tendency to obey orders. What he told us was just how powerful this tendency is. So why did so many subjects perform this task? Milgram said it was due to 5 situational factors: the physical presence of an authority figure, the fact that the study was sponsored by Yale, a trusted and authoritative academic institution, the selection of the teacher and learner seemed random. The actual subject and the confederate drew slips of paper to indicate who would be the learner and who would be the teacher. This was set up so that the real subject would always get the role of the teacher. The participants assumed the experimenter was a competent expert. He worked at Yale and wore a lab coat. The shocks were said to be painful but not dangerous.
Although Milgram's study tells us a lot about obedience to authority, there were some ethical issues present. The subjects were led to believe that they were giving electric shocks to participants when the victim was just another experimenter. However, revealing the true nature of the experiment would have biased the results. Participants were not given a true informed consent. Once again, in order to keep the results from being biased, participants thought they were volunteering for a learning experiment. After the experiment, many of the teachers showed signs of psychological distress. The situations were extremely stressful and traumatized some participants. Each time a participant asked if they could stop the experimenter said things like, "You have no alternative. You must go on." It is unclear whether or not Milgram's study had a direct impact on the development of APA ethical guidelines, but it was a factor. Nevertheless, today researchers have ethical guidelines that they must follow. Fast forward 45 years and you will see that Milgram has had a lasting impact on psychology. Researcher Jerry Berger wanted to see if he could replicate Milgram's study in 2006. With the implementation of the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, Berger knew that he would need to change parts of Milgram's study. Participants were pre-screened to see if they would have a negative reaction to the experiment. Berger also excluded anyone who had taken more than 2 psychology courses as a means of not ruining the experiment. Psychological stress was reduced by only permitting participants to deliver up to 150 volts, which was the point of no return in Milgram's study. Throughout the experiment, participants were told explicitly and repeatedly that they could withdraw from the experiment at any time and still receive their monetary reward. Would people still behave in the same way? Berger's research says yes. He found that 70% of participants were still willing to continue after 150 volts. At which point, Berger then ended the experiment.
Why didn't you stop? I saw him getting strapped in, and they were just like little. I mean, he could have just, if he was in that much pain, he could have just tore himself off.
Why are you putting it on him and not you or the experimenter?
I was just doing my job. I was doing what I was supposed to do.
The world has changed a lot since the 1960s, but the same situational factors still affect people today. People act in unpredicted and disturbing ways. Both Berger and Milgram concluded that obedience to authority is predisposed, and that we are all capable of compliance.
Come on, that's just the way it is. Things will never be the same. That's just the way it is.